again, everybody, and welcome to Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22 alongside Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter. I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks, as always, for joining us as we continue with the Zoom class. And now we have to figure out in the off season for football and basketball, who's the basketball player is going to be. And that's been the biggest news really of the week over at Mizzou, is there are some goings in Drew Buggs, but there are some comings as well. So that's the roster is being reshaped, Gabe, as we go, and kind of on the fly. This will be a completely different team next season.
Yeah, I think we're back up to 11 players. They have 2 spots available. I mean, Kobe Brown, Javon Pickett, Jordan Wilmore are, at this point, I guess it's safe to say, coming back next year. Those are the 3 returnees, the 5 freshmen, and then they've had the 3 transfers in: Amari Davis from Green Bay, Deshaun Gordon from K-State, and Jerron Coleman from Ball State. So yeah, it's a new look team. And look, this is college basketball. I think last I saw was like 26% of players in the country are transferring. So every team is going to average like 3 transfers in or out this year, which is crazy. But I don't know. I can't speak for Dave. It's been kind of entertaining. It's given us something to follow here for a couple weeks. And it kind of reminds me back of when you remember when Reggie White became the first NFL free agent, and everybody was like, oh, this is the biggest deal ever. And he's taken all these visits, and everybody thought it was going to ruin the NFL. I don't know. I haven't checked lately, but the NFL appears to have survived. I think it's doing okay.
Yeah, I'd say it's doing all right. And what do we know about Gordon and Coleman, Dave? And that's kind of the amazing thing for fans, is they hear the news and the kid signs, and then they have to go research them and dig up what they've done already.
Yeah, I think Gordon, I think would probably be received better if he wasn't coming from the same school that Mark Smith was going to, because the answer I've gotten for weeks, everybody thinks they're a comedian, is, oh, it's a trade. You know, they traded Mark Smith for Gordon. Gordon's not as good. Well, yeah, they're both going in opposite directions, but he's a very different kind of player. I mean, he's not a 3-point shooter. He doesn't take many threes, and he doesn't make many threes either. But he's more of an athletic, rim, the kind of athlete that's a game. And I don't think he's somebody that comes in and starts shooting from deep. I don't think that will be the role for him. But he is somebody that I think adds a dimension that they don't have right now. And then Coleman, I think, is a really intriguing pickup. The more I watch some highlights of him, the more you read a little bit more about him and talk to people, that know him, I think he can step right in, be their starting point guard, and not really miss a beat. I mean, he's a good 3-point shooter. He's a playmaker. He can play multiple positions, and frankly, felt like he kind of hit his ceiling in the Mid-American Conference and was ready for that next stage. So I think the guys they lost to the portal, not the seniors, but the guys they lost: Torrance Watson, Pinson, Parker Brown, Ed Chang. Guess we got to mention him. I think on paper it's a net gain. I mean, they're adding 3 players who I think will contribute more than the guys who left. And Pinson obviously is the better of the 4, but I think they're adding more than they're losing, frankly.
And now this leaves 2 open, which they could keep open, but they can keep looking too, with over 1,000 people in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and full disclosure, we're doing this on Thursday afternoon. By the time people see it, who knows? There might be another player, right? That's the way this all goes. But it's pretty clear at this point they want a front court player and Tamar Bates, who is a high school guard originally from Overland Park, transferred to IMG, signed with Texas, and asked out of his letter of intent. The front court player I think they were initially after was Christian Bishop from Creighton, but nobody you talk to thinks that kid's ending up at Missouri. Kansas is the favorite, but even if he doesn't end up at Kansas, most people that know some things about that recruitment don't expect it to be Missouri. So the newest offer is, or the newest kid they've been tied to, I don't know if offer is the right term, but is a kid named Daniel Oladapo out of Oakland up in Michigan. And he's a big rebounder. I think he averaged 13 points, 8.8 rebounds for Oakland. He's only 6'7", but a post player doesn't have to be 6'11", 260 like Jeremiah Tillman does. It can be a guy like that. Ricardo Ratliff was 6'8". I mean, Arthur Johnson wasn't much bigger than 6'8". So you can be effective in there at 6'7", 6'8".
And let's be honest, Gabe, that's what they're going to need. I mean, if you can pair him up, or a kid like that, with Kobe Brown, then maybe you got something on the rebounding front.
Yeah, and you got Yaya Keita coming in, who's going to play the 5. He's probably a little bit more of a developmental guy. I mean, I think he'll play next year, but coming off a torn ACL, I don't think you ask him to start and play 25 minutes. Jordan Wilmore, who knows what more you get out of him next year. I think he's going to spend a lot of time with Nicodemus Christopher in the weight room this year and see what he can give him. But it's going to be probably more of like a 4 out, 1 in offense, I would think. And I don't know that this team will have a traditional center. I mean, they will when Keita or Wilmore's in the game, but when it's Kobe Brown, or if they were to get Oladapo or somebody like that, maybe it's more of kind of a power forward playing what most people traditionally call the 5.
Dave, I want to kind of move this forward. What for Wilmore, is this a big offseason, a big summer? Just because if he does make some improvements, he'll play. If he doesn't, they know what they have.
Yeah, it has to be big for him. Now, remember, he didn't get to Columbia until I think late August. He wasn't. They didn't have the regular summer workouts because of COVID, and he was especially late. He's got some weight he's got to lose. I mean, there's no getting around that. He played. I think the last game he played was that Auburn game, and it didn't go well for him for a couple possessions. And from then on, he was on the bench. And I think a full off season, just a normal off season, could do wonders for him. Nobody's predicting that he's going to be Wilt Chamberlain or anything like that, but he is 7'3". So if he gets in shape and he can give you, and he doesn't have to give you 20 minutes a game, if he can give you something, he's going to be the biggest player in the SEC most likely. So there's got to be something there you can get out of that. And if not, I think like you said, you'll figure that out this year.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's talk about the Final Four. The semifinal games, I was surprised with the Baylor win over Houston. I thought that was going to be a closer game. And then probably the game of the tournament is UCLA and Gonzaga, with the Zags winning in overtime on the half-court heave by Suggs. And then Baylor runs out Gonzaga on Monday night. Gonzaga looked tired, which you can kind of get after what they went through with UCLA, but Baylor was the better team. And there's no arguing that. They won 6 in a row. And really, except for maybe a bout with COVID during the season, they could have been undefeated.
Yeah, I think Baylor is a COVID outbreak away from being talked about as one of the best teams in college basketball history, because that's what people were saying about Gonzaga going in, right? If they finished this off. And that was, a lot of people, I saw a lot of, well, this is a big letdown, this game, it's a blowout. I couldn't take my eyes off that game because I can't remember the last team that I saw play that well in the NCAA title game. I mean, I think you're going back to Larry Johnson and UNLV blowing Duke out of the building for the last time. I just watched a game that there was no question who was winning, but I just kept watching it because I thought, I haven't seen basketball like this in a long time.
Gonzaga had no answer either. I mean, that game was, it's 9-0, it's 23-6. And you knew that even when they got to within 10 at halftime, I thought, unless they have a 6-point run to start the second half, this game's still over. And that's the way it played out, Dave.
Yeah, and it looked like boys against men. I mean, it looked like a junior high team showed up at like the Rec on men's league night, when like you got some guys that they can throw some elbows around and play pretty rough, and they looked intimidated. They really did. And Baylor's this physical, grinded out team, but they're also really skilled. I mean, they've got guys, like every starter shoots 40% from 3. Davion Mitchell made a lot of money for himself over the last 3 weeks. I thought he looked like Kawhi Leonard out there. He could do everything. I mean, handle the ball, play great defense, and shoot threes. I mean, there's nothing he couldn't do. I was really impressed by them. And it's those guys for Gonzaga are still good players. And Jalen Stokes still going to be a top 3 pick. Drew Timme is a really, really good college player. He'll play in the NBA, and Corey Kispert will too. But they were no match for that team, who just looked like they were. I mean, they just looked like they wanted it more, and also they were just a better team.
And so here's a program that comes from the depths of, the lowest depths you can possibly come from, and wins a national title. And to me, I heard it from some Mizzou fans, it's like, when is it ever going to be our time to get a team like that? I mean, it's just the way it goes. I hate to say it, and you can't predict that would happen here.
I mean, Missouri has had teams that were on that level.
Yeah.
They just didn't win 4 games at the right time. The 88-89 team that had Byron Irvin, Doug Smith, and Anthony Peeler, I mean, that team was on that level. Mike Anderson's team that lost in the regional final to Connecticut, they were good enough. The team that lost to Norfolk was certainly good enough at times. And I get the easy story to write is look what Scott Drew took over and look what it is now. This was Scott Drew's 18th season. Guys, yeah. I mean, that stuff with Dave Bliss didn't happen 6 months ago, and that doesn't make the turnaround any less impressive. It's certainly impressive, but Scott Drew, I mean, he made an Elite Eight, I think, in his 5th year. So he's obviously a heck of a coach and has been for a long time. But the whole idea that we just kind of fast forwarded through 17 years to go from, hey, Dave Bliss and he covered up murder, and now Scott Drew won a national title. Like, there's a lot of things that happened in between there.
In his first couple of years, they took beatings. I mean, they were awful. And I guess you have to say kudos to Baylor for sticking with them. I mean, they could have gotten rid of him after 4 years and said, hey, thanks for turning the program around, but they stuck with him, and now they've been rewarded, Dave.
Yeah, and then more recently, he had the reputation of a guy who couldn't win in March. I mean, he had these good teams with NBA players that some coaches in the Big 12 wondered how he was getting them. Bob Knight was one, and Rick Barnes was another. I mean, they're pretty critical of the guy and his recruiting. There's a lot of smoke around Scott Drew, but not a whole lot of fire. And then his team seemed to collapse in the tournament. So he kind of had that reputation that Missouri fans feel like is only theirs to call these days. But that's what Baylor was. They weren't living up to their potential and last year they would have been a number 1 seed probably had there been a tournament, and maybe they would have won it all. Who knows? But this year they definitely fulfilled all that promise and potential.
And the irony is, after Monday night, now Mark Few's that guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Bill Self used to be that guy. John Calipari used to be that. You're that guy until just one time you're not, and you win 6 games in a row.
And if you're Gonzaga and you're a fan of Gonzaga, do you say, when are we going to win? I mean, they've had good teams, but you got to get lucky too.
Right. The idea that, well, Gonzaga wasn't tested enough because they were in the West Coast Conference. Dude, they blew out West Virginia, Kansas, Iowa, and USC this year. They were good enough. They had a bad day on the wrong night against a team that had a really good day. And this is why just the judging of entire programs on 3 weeks in March is so incredibly stupid. If you just keep putting yourself in position, eventually you're going to get there. I mean, Roy Williams at one time was the guy that, yeah, he's really good, but man, he can't win it. And then he won 3, and he's like one of the best coaches in college basketball history, So if you just keep winning 30 games and being a 1 seed, odds are at some point you're going to win one.
And to that point, your expectations change. I mean, let's be honest, the expectation for Missouri, the hope was, hey, let's beat Oklahoma and see what happens there. So you got to kind of build it on the fly, Dave.
Yeah, and this tournament is so fickle. I mean, if Arkansas hits a couple more shots, we're talking about Gonzaga winning the national championship probably, because against Baylor, because maybe Baylor doesn't make it that far. So there's luck involved for sure. You got to have the body of work. You got to do enough to get a favorable seed, and then you just got to pull it off for 3 weeks in a row and give Baylor all the credit for doing it.
I mean, UCLA might have been the last team in that tournament, and they were a half-court heave away from playing for the national title.
Right.
So, it's a great event. It is awesome to watch, and this year was better than most, but it's not what you should judge programs and coaches on.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll check the Twitter feed. Your tweets next, right here on Tiger Sidelines on MC22. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tiger Sidelines on MC22 alongside Gabe DeArmond and Dave Manor. I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget, we're at Tiger Sidelines. We're to the time of the year where we need your tweets that'll help fill the show. And we got one this week from Dan, who says, a few weeks ago, KU signed Bill Self to a lifetime contract. How much would they have to pay you on a lifetime contract as the KU football coach? Before we get into that, very interesting to me that they give a lifetime contract to Bill Self. There's a lot of smoke there, Dave, and he has set himself up, not saying it's not deserved. It's just in this day and age, it's interesting to see a lifetime contract.
Well, he's facing 5 level 1 violations and the same, if not very similar, violations and things that are coming to Arizona. And what does Arizona do? They fire their coach. Why? Well, because Arizona hasn't been very good lately, and Kansas hasn't been as good lately as it has been, but still good enough to make the tournament and compete in the Big 12. I don't think any of us can put it any better than I think Pat Forty did this week. Is that it just clearly makes a statement from Lawrence is that Kansas just cares about winning. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this. You can keep your coach, you can fight the violations, but to give a lifetime contract in the face of all of this, that's the loudest message statement you can make.
I also think it's kind of a lazy reporting to call this a lifetime contract. I mean, it's fun. It makes jokes easy. And I've made some, no question about it. But the truth is it's a 5-year deal and every year it rolls over for another year. But if Self stops winning, or if he commits another violation, or if they just decide you're too much trouble, they can still fire him. It's going to cost $5 to $8 million. So the idea that he's there as long as he wants to be, I mean, he's there as long as he wants to be, and he keeps winning. The part of the contract that I thought was the most noteworthy was he cannot be fired for cause for any of the violations before April 2nd, 2021. I mean, that was the double middle finger to the NCAA, and also, like, they just hired an AD yesterday. So this was like a hurry up and get this done before we hire an AD that might not worship at the altar of Bill.
And now he's in seat. And so he's stuck with Bill. I mean, no matter what happens.
Which is not a bad thing, obviously.
That's right. But no matter what happens, I mean, even if they get put on probation and pretty deep probation, they're keeping Bill Self, Dave.
Yeah, and I there was a lot of speculation as soon as this happens, but I jump ship as soon as the program he's led for so long gets in trouble. So yeah, I think he's there for a while.
It'll be interesting. Now let's make fun of KU football and say, what do you have to do? I mean, Mark Mangino couldn't get a lifetime contract, and he was their best coach in recent memory.
I mean, I think the question was, how much would they have to pay you to be not that much. I mean, I would do it for less than they're going to pay whoever they hire. There's not much question about that. Like the lowest paid Power 5 coach is probably making like $1.5 million a year. Sign me up, man. I'll go coach KU football and be awful for like 6 years. And I'm going to walk away and I'm never going to work another day in my life. I do know some people that like won't eat at restaurants because they're owned by KU people and all that. Look, man, it's not that important to me. I will wear the fake bird on my chest for $1.5 million a year. I will put that out there right now. Their
money still spends.
Yes.
All right. Let's take a break. Thanks for the tweet. Don't forget, we need more tweets. We're at Tiger Sidelines on Twitter. We'll be back right after this, right here on Tiger Sidelines. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tiger Sidelines. Gabe, Dave, and Bo here. And let's go to the Diamond Sports. The softball team swept South Carolina, winning 13-4, 7-3, and 10-6. The Tigers are now 28-7 overall, 6-3 on the season. Shortstop Jenna Laird named the SEC Freshman of the Week for the second time this season. This week, the softball team will play LSU here in Columbia. Then the Tigers host Kansas for a midweek game next week. But to me, last weekend getting a sweep was much needed for this team, not for their record or anything, but just for the psyche of, okay, we are one of the better teams in this league, even though this is a stacked league.
Yeah, I think they're fourth place in the league overall. They don't do it by divisions, and they lead the league in like every offensive category. I mean, just about all of them. And they seem to have a legit lineup, legit offense. Pitching has not been as good as some other teams in the league, but that's kind of what their identity is right now. And they look like a team that's in position to not just contend for the SEC, but host a regional and who knows after that. So it seems like Larissa's got that program up and going back to where it was, maybe not at its peak, but pretty close.
And you have to think that obviously they'll put in for a regional bid with the beautiful softball stadium now, and that would be a huge advantage. I got to be honest. I didn't think the baseball team would get off the deck, but they got off the deck a little bit last weekend. They lost their first game against Texas A&M, and their losing streak continued. However, they turned around and won the final 2 games of that series to win that series 2-1. Missouri's now 10-17, which is obviously not good, but they're 3-6 in the league, which doesn't sound good, but certainly doesn't place them at the bottom either. And that's maybe the key number to watch if they can continue to win series in the SEC. Now, that's obviously, Gabe, easier said than done.
Well, and that's the problem. Because of the start, they've now put themselves in a position where they've got to be 2-1 almost every weekend. You can't go 0-3 ever. And so you're just lining up these top 25 programs every week and going, we got to win 2 out of 3. And that's a tough place to be. I mean, in the SEC in baseball, if you're Missouri, if you're going to make the tournament, like, you've got to build yourself up a little bit of a cushion in the non-conference season and understand, hey, the ceiling here might be 500-ish in the league, but if we do that, we're going to get in as long as we do okay in the non-con. Well, they didn't do okay in the non-con. And so now they find themselves really, and I don't know exactly the schedule, but, teams like Arkansas, Mississippi State, South Carolina still out there, and you got to go 2-1 pretty much every weekend.
Yeah, and they're at South Carolina, who is ranked number 11 for 3 games starting Friday. Then they'll host Missouri State for another midweek game. That'll be next Tuesday. It's really, Dave, a week where they kind of need to go 3-1.
Yeah, I would think so. And that Missouri State, it's always a tough opponent because the Bears are always good, and that game seems to mean more for Missouri State because there's like bragging rights on the line, state bragging rights, and a lot of those kids probably didn't get Missouri offers, even though that's been a better program here for a while now, and it had more postseason success for sure. So that's always a tough one. Yeah, if I'd give them credit for winning 2 out of 3 against an A&M team that's not as good as it has been in the past, but that's still hard to do for this team. So maybe they figured some things out,
and maybe they got the pitching in order. We'll go right back to Dave for gymnastics coverage. Number 23 gymnastics scoring a 196.550, placed 4th at the NCAA regional at Tuscaloosa. Number 1 Oklahoma, number 7 Alabama were the top 2 finishers to go to the national championship. However, Hannah McCrary and Sydney Schaefer both earned spots at the championships as individual qualifiers for their performances at the regional. So again, I say it all the time, I feel like a broken record, but they're continuing to build that program the right way.
And they will compete, one of them on the beam and one of them on the floor. And if you ask me which on which, I'm not sure exactly, but I know that that's what they will do, and they will do it well, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And so a fine season, especially in COVID, for that team. Jaden Cox, kind of a big story in the wrestling world, failed to qualify for the Olympics because he missed a weigh-in, and I'm told there's an arbitration hearing coming up maybe within the next week, because the story goes, he was told a wrong time to weigh in, missed weigh-in, and then they said, you're disqualified. And so Jaden Cox did not make the Olympic team, and he was obviously, at his weight, was going to be the guy. So we'll see what happens with the arbitration hearing there. Also in wrestling, 165-pounder Keegan O'Toole was named the Mid-American Conference Freshman of the Year. No surprise there. Talking about postseason as well, the Mizzou volleyball team has to wait a little while, but they've made the NCAA tournament for the 6th consecutive season. They'll face South Dakota on Wednesday, April 14th. I think it's in a bubble, isn't it, in Omaha? Is that right?
They're in Omaha.
That's
yes.
good.
I know that much.
Yeah, and I think they'll be in a bubble there. And so, I mean, the volleyball program hasn't missed a beat either. And quietly, there's 6 straight postseason appearances. Mizzou Athletics received a big donation, a 7-figure anonymous donation. What do you think is the reason for the upticks in donations, or is it just that we're hearing about every one of them?
Well, it's 2 things. It's Drinkwitz, and people are excited, and that's great. And Missouri puts out a press release every time somebody writes them a $37 check, So that happens too. And we've got Twitter and all that. Going back to volleyball, like, I guess they're just going to finish the NCAA tournament and then start next season, right? They're just going to turn right around and play the NCAA. It was like a 14-month season.
Yeah, pretty much. They had that layoff around Christmas, and kind of the same with soccer. Soccer played in the fall and the spring. But yeah, and you're right about that. Every time there is a donation, you see it on social media, you see the release, it's on their website. And so I think that the donations may be getting larger, but also for sure the trumpeting is getting bigger and louder as well, Dave.
And they were smart about putting out this stated goal of what they wanted for that indoor facility and then continually updating it publicly, like, well, we're only 9 million away. And then what do you know? Somebody writes $1 million check. So that they've been good about that. I mean, that's make it a public deal. And then those folks who are technically anonymous, but they know who they are and the school knows who they are, they're giving the checks.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, that's going to wrap up the show for this week. Want to thank everybody behind the scenes, including Matt and Brian. Want to ask for more tweets for next week? We're at Tiger Sidelines. We'll answer your questions. For Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter, I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks as always for joining us on Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22.